sound like we're talking? No, we're not. Well, hey there, welcome back. So at the beginning of every year, I do a most useful and helpful episodes of the previous year. But interestingly, episodes that have come out recently this year have come up a lot in discussions for some reason. And since they have, I thought it might be kind of fun to do a mid-year check on that, especially since we have a number of new people listening. And first of all, hello. As a matter of housekeeping, just remember, if you're listening to this, you might be listening to it on iTunes or Spotify or somewhere else. You may actually be listening to it on the Alchemy for Life website. If you're listening on the website, almost always there is an article that goes along with it. If you are listening because you're a subscriber, thank you. It means that you get the article in your email. On the Alchemy for Life page, you can actually click on all podcast episodes, and every single episode I have done through the years, almost 300, is available with a little blurb on that page. And all you have to do is click on the search, or you can hit Control F if you're on Windows, or Command F if you're on a Mac, and you can just sort of zoom into whatever you'd like to listen to. Having said all that boring housekeeping stuff, I'm sorry, let's get to the good stuff. I interviewed a gentleman who is the CEO of a plastics manufacturing company, and what sets them apart is they literally have the only plastic that is completely dissolvable in water and leaves no forever chemicals. They own 9 patents to that effect. I was lucky enough to have an hour-long conversation with Manuel Rendon. We could have spoken for 6 hours. It was fascinating, and we've actually stayed in touch since the interview, where I've learned quite a bit more about new products coming out. So imagine drinking a bottle of water and going, oh, well, just toss that in a lake, and that's okay. That's literally what we're talking about here. So it's called Manuel Rendon of Timeplast and 4D Programmable Matter. The next one I'd recommend is if you've ever helped someone and thought, wow, that was easy, but then when it comes time to help yourself, you're a little bit more panicky and a little bit more emotional. Like someone comes to you for advice and you say, oh, well, let me think about that objectively. I think what I would do is do this, this, and this. And they say, oh, I'm so glad I come to you for help. And then you look in the mirror and you're like, yeah, I have the same problem. Oh my God, what am I going to do? That's because we typically use 2 different parts of our brain for those 2 different situations. When you are helping another person, you typically use your frontal cortex. It's where your logic and reasoning comes from. But when your problem is personal, that typically comes from your limbic system. And that is where decisions trigger things like fear, uncertainty, doubt, which makes the decision a lot more difficult. So the name of this episode is called Teacher, Teach Thyself. As you may or may not know, in addition to the nonfiction experimental psychology I've written, I've also written an epic trilogy set 1,000 years in the future. It's an epic coming-of-age, hero's journey, father-daughter story. The genesis of this, the origin of this, is really a little unbelievable. And sometimes when I tell people this story, I expect for them to hang up or simply walk away. But it really is true, and it's really amazing. But in addition to writing the books and actually recording the audiobook for The Sword and the Sunflower, I wrote the screenplay. Screenplays are handled in a certain way where most people who write books, the original books and so forth, tend not to write this screenplay. That's typically a different skill set, and it's handled by someone who's paid very well to do it. The person is typically trusted by the person who ends up directing and so forth, and sometimes they work together. But what made it really interesting for me is that it hurt my brain, because I basically had to tell the story again, but using sort of a different descriptive tool. There are things that you can do in a book that you absolutely cannot do in a screenplay. Thinking about what the character is thinking. You are privy to their thoughts, but in a screenplay, in a movie, you really don't want to have the person thinking their way through the movie. I mean, there are some movies and some stories that do that as part of their story, but on average, you typically don't want to constantly be hearing the main character's thoughts. I mean, sometimes it's funny, but for the most part, no. Also, when it comes to landscape and position of the camera and all that stuff, In a book, I can paint broad brushes, I can direct your attention to different places, I can engage your imagination in ways that in a movie you really can't. And I tell you all this because what it really teaches is how to communicate in an unfamiliar medium. And you probably will be forced to do that, or have been hundreds of times, where you have to talk to your marketing department, or you're a small business owner and you think, okay, well, now I need a website. And you can go to someone for a website, but you still have to have the persona of the website. You still have to communicate with your customers and say, well, what message do you want to convey? Is this a corporate site? Is this fun? Is this personable? All those things. And so basically you're communicating in the medium of you having your website or your marketing stuff, or you're asked to give a talk. Well, you don't normally give talks for your information. You meet with clients, you talk to them, and that's it. You don't get up on a stage. Again, you're communicating in a different medium. And this episode is called What I Learned Writing a Screenplay. Okay, so we've all done it. Come on, admit it. You've done it. It's been done to you. It may have been done to you many, many times. And every single time it was done to you, or almost every single time, you probably didn't enjoy it. What I'm referring to is what we like to call ghosting. It's essentially when communication abruptly stops. Sometimes we are ghosted, and sometimes we are the ghost. And so in an episode explaining that and how and why sometimes it's actually a healthy thing, whether it's personal communications or business, it's handled in an episode called The Anatomy of Ghosting. Sometimes the episodes are, shall we say, philosophical. We handle a lot of not only experimental psychology, but some business acumen, some human interest, if you will, and how, people communicate personally, balancing life and family and all that stuff. But as I said, sometimes it's a bit philosophical, and I really like to engage in that because I'd like the feedback of hearing that people say, well, I never considered that. Right now, you're hearing my voice and we're sort of communicating. I'd like to think that it almost feels like a discussion. Of course, it's one-sided, but if I was on the phone with you, you would think that we're live talking to each other, but we're not, because my consciousness is somewhere else. I mean, you think you're hearing me talk, but you're not even hearing me talk. You're hearing my voice that's then been translated by the microphone into impulses, which are then recorded in a certain way, put into a file, transmitted, sent to you on your phone, restructured so that it vibrates something that then sends sound waves to your ear. Does that sound like we're talking? No, we're not. In this episode, and again, they're about 10 minutes in this episode, I take it a few levels higher and give you some what ifs. And this episode is called Non-Local Consciousness. And again, keeping with philosophy, I have an episode simply called Good or Evil. This episode asks you a very interesting question. You will probably use the pause button more than once in this episode. And typically what I like to do with people is, rather than just talk their ears off for 10 minutes and then they go, oh, wait, what did he say there? I'm still absorbing that. If I ask a question and I'd like you to consider something, sometimes it's really nice to have the luxury of actually just pausing the episode. And so we do that sometimes in the episodes where I'll ask a question, you get to pause it, you think about it, and then you continue. And I think it's a really cool tool to use. In this episode, it's no different, in which we talk about your favorite game. And we take your motivation for winning to, again, another level. So I think you'll really enjoy this one as well. And finally, there's hypnosis and speaking to your manager. And in this episode, I explore and ask you who your manager is. I skipped over a few episodes, but these are a good chunk of what we have in 2025 so far. And I don't like to see really good episodes and really good information that could be the catalyst for you having a discussion with someone, or even me, in which you provide feedback. I hate to see those fall by the wayside. And with this many episodes, I want people to have the benefit of getting to see them. So, again, These are the episodes from 2025 so far that I think kind of jump out. Feel free to go back and listen to them, and thank you so much for listening. Take care.
Living life every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days.
I want to announce that my new book, my 10th, is out. It's called Because, the fundamental psychological building blocks that enable you to, or prevent you from, accomplishing anything, everything, and nothing. Check it out on Amazon. It's only $9.99.